back for another matinee. Uh, this is a double feature today. We're going to be doing uh, back-to-back podcasts, go over some news items, chat with our old friend Justin. This one's a little bit more loose. Going to be probably doing some rapping. Going to be rapping about different foods that I like. No, I don't think so. We are going to talk about. I don't know. What are we going to talk about today, Justin?
We're basically going to talk about what it means to be a leftist in the West, if that's even possible.
I like where this is going. So what does it take these days to be a leftist in the world that we live in? And what do you think everybody's confused about what that means?
Yeah, basically, what I started to reflect on, I guess, is just like comments that I will see online. I'm going to stop bending down and trying to do this. It's okay. I was just trying to pull up the thing over here so I could see the comments at the same time more easily. I figured out how I could do it. But yeah, so anyway, so I'm reflecting on comments from people kind of saying, oh, leftists in the West are just liberals. And, you think about that, and it's if you've studied Marxist materialism to any degree, I think it's pretty obvious what they're talking about. And, um, I've certainly myself have stayed primarily focused on working on my essentially bourgeois art career. Um, but what have I done to improve material conditions for others, let alone others in the global world? So I think for me, even though Trump in office is like a change to fascism that is more extreme, no doubt, it's like I think if you've really studied the history of how this country came together, it's not at all surprising. It in fact it might even be regression to the mean after only 80 years compared to the previous 160 of the New Deal policies that were the most socialist America ever got. So the whole like making the imperial core better, sure, but like it just doesn't stop there, right? So it kind of makes sense to just start thinking, one, what can I do with a relatively global privileged position? Like what is even possible to do? And two, just deepening the understanding of socialism by seeking out authors who are non-Western socialists, because I realize that most most socialists are non-Western. Or at least what we think of as the West in terms of Europe and North America. They're in South America, they're in Asia, and scattered throughout elsewhere as well. But I've like gotten a lot from watching this channel Non-Compete, where he lives in Vietnam now, and he's married to someone who grew up in the post Ho Chi Minh regime there. And I think that is a fascinating study, because what they describe in terms of, coming back from complete devastation, but I particularly related to the part of Ho Chi Minh's story where he's like hiding in the mountains. Uh, I've retreated to the mountains a lot in life, and was like gathering support, and like they raided Japanese like arms facilities to get guns, and it was crazy. And all the while we're translating Marx and other social into Vietnamese. Um,
Wow.
and one of the central things that Ho Chi Minh believed in, and I love this, is that people have to actually understand. You have to actually teach people enough that they understand the concepts themselves, because um, you know otherwise you do get these different really unthought out reactionary political opinions that can just form in its absence. So the Vietnamese school structure actually really emphasizes things that I would think, wow, that's actually pretty out there, thinking about the American school system. Things like dialectical materialism, historical materialism, scientific socialism, and then there's two others that are just core to their curriculum. And I was also reflecting that probably the most influential book that I ever read for explaining like the history of America is Settlers, which was definitely not written by a Westerner either, written by a Japanese American. So this all builds up to what I hope is at least a fun little thought experiment about it.
I write down Settlers. Everybody out there, check out Settlers.
Absolutely. In fact, we could even benefit from the stream just by cracking it open and showing a few pages, maybe in a bit, or at least going over some of the key arcs that were important to me about that book. I think that is good. That is good. But first, I want to do this experiment because I want to bring everybody who's watching or everybody who will watch on board with what I'm feeling. And luckily, there's an immensely popular piece of media out right now that I think actually perfectly reflects this feeling of waking up to global political consciousness. And the thing is like, I remember being young and thinking, damn, like, okay, so America is 4% of the world. And of course, I'm very, this is the best country I could have been born into. Hence, the odds are very low. I am very lucky. This seems improbable even that I should have spawned here. And I think that was just, well, I wouldn't have called it this at the time, but I think that's just recognizing the absurdism of life. That was like maybe the first glance at the absurd. Like, why then? And so that's kind of like the initial reaction thought. However, you can also maybe empathize with how it feels to be somebody who didn't. Somebody who's like, yep, like most people are just fucking working for a few dollars a day, getting their labor exploited. People they know die, whatever. And there's these people who live not just ones who live in extreme luxury and are kind of at the top of taking advantage of it all, but also a large class of completely propagandized workers who take part in the system without even ever in their life understanding what we're going through or how much they're actually complicit in it. And I think much like how we might have, anybody might have like at one point in life, a fantasy of what if I were richer than I am.
Right.
Because the fantasy of even wanting to be rich it's just richer than I am. That's the fantasy, right?
The idea of plenty.
Yeah. And so you can kind of imagine that if you are in a more privileged position, this is the thought experiment. You can imagine, okay, well, what if I could put myself in that headspace, but then find myself in reality actually being in the Imperial Corps, actually having benefited from this system? What would I then do best, apart from cause mayhem? Like, what would I genuinely best do? And the piece of media that I want to reference, without giving too many crazy spoilers, and it's just a spoiler for the end of season 1, but close your ears if you haven't watched Severance yet, because what they do as they're building is, you have no idea that one of the severed people is a mole. She doesn't even realize it because they don't have any memory. So at the end of the episode, they find a way to trigger a switch because they have only their inside personalities and histories known to them, and then the outside is completely severed. That's like the premise of the show. But there's a switch they can flick, and then their inside personalities and consciousnesses will be on the outside. They'll finally know what's going on. And in everybody's story, pretty much what you expect to have happen happens, because we've already seen in the show glimpses of the outside for them. But there's one character that we never saw glimpses of the outside of. And that character wakes up on a stage with massive pictures of her and her work buddies dressed in a freaking gala dress, and then realizes she's like directly related to the current president of the whole big company. And that scene is literally so diabolically scary, especially after a whole season of buildup of really having a lot of story about the normalcy of life, the small things, and also like setting it up to be very much like how you might remember school in terms of like punishment from authority. And then all of a sudden, totally new environment. It's the most possible intense thing. It's just such an overwhelming feeling that you have. The catharsis from that. Okay, now the spoiler section is over. But I just want to say that I very much see a parallel there with waking up to political consciousness in the West. You know what I mean? We
Okay.
if we if we learn more about the failures of capitalism abroad and the triumphs of socialism abroad, I think we kind of find ourselves like Helly, like, oh shit, like I'm like absurdly close to it then. Yeah. So with that in mind, I guess we can. Well, I actually kind of want to just get your reaction on all of that before, and then we can do some overview of some of the settlers' history.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Uh, what we're heading for is a science fiction kind of thing, um, and
Yeah, very
the
much
the
so.
the
Because
very
the people in charge are inspired by it actively.
actively, and they think of themselves in that way as being benevolent. What would you say? Enlightened despotism, where we'll take care of everything for you, you stupid people. But we are heading towards this time when people are going to become redundant, and that's going to mean that it will be hard to justify our existence because so much over the years has stopped our own governments from killing us because they needed us as a workforce. But if we aren't needed as a workforce anymore, how that'll change the perception of the powers that be? Because let's be honest, the people who have always been in charge since the beginning of time, there's been hierarchies because we're just predisposed to having hierarchies because we fall into line. Some people are very submissive, some people are very arrogant and alpha, if you will. This is not ever going to change. And the technology that we have now only creates more abstractions and complications on top of that thing. So it doesn't look good in my idea. But there's also some democratizing sort of ideas and things happening. But it's a great race to see that if we can technology our way out of the mess that we're creating. And I don't see that happening, especially considering stuff like pollution and waste. And yeah, it doesn't look good. So that's my
Well, I
two
think we
cents.
did try to stream. It might have been a low quality one on my part, but I think we did try to stream in like July, and we went over that paper that talked about basically as cities grow, the demands get greater. Or I
Oh,
guess I should
right.
go this way for you.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then between technology will delay something, but because the overall demands are still so great, the time between calamities where improvements would need to be made gets shorter and shorter. And so there is sort of an endpoint where things start kind of just getting destroyed instead of getting created, I guess, because
Interesting.
it hits a limit, and then what happens at that limit is just death.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's what we're all fighting against, and I do think that it's worth just right up front in this conversation, especially because I at no point want to get us to like a liberal white guilt perspective, and I also don't want us to get to a doomer perspective that encroaches on our ability to take action. So I want to do something
That
in between. And I want to remind everybody that when reactionaries say, "Oh, the world's always been bad," they are half right. The world has always had immense problems of various types, and it is easy to take for granted the ones that have been solved from history when looking back on history, or even just when looking at the present. So I think that both things are true at once. A lot of things are better for humans in a material way today, and a lot of things are more difficult and stressful for people mentally, emotionally, and kind of within um the ennui that naturally develops around certain types of material subsistence. You know, I do think that it's wrong to say that material needs um are met in a way that's always a net gain for people. You know, what people have lost in terms of communities, uh, that matters that's just as material of a situation, right? So there has been a shift. There have been shifts where people have less autonomy, they own their shit less. Um, those sort of things do make it, right, like right now, a unique challenge. um, but yeah, it is good. It is good to do the thought experiment of, okay, imagine if I were the most enlightened person X amount of years ago, 400 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, but I still only have the one life of 30 to whatever years. So I'm limited to this time, right? And
yeah
so everybody gets that. Everybody gets only a little bit of time, and you can always enlighten your. I think sometimes we gaslight ourselves when we think about what are likely outcomes. If they feel too extreme, we'll be like, oh, well, you can't even see the future, you know. And we almost gaslight ourselves about it.
yeah
But like, um you know, like, I think one of the core, like, dichotomies, at least, if not ironies, of leftist positioning is the dual belief that a lot of bad things are going to happen. Sure, they could be prevented, but we're not doing
well
that, right?
leftism absolutely thrives on hysterics, like, because seeing injustice puts you into a state of panic, and when that part of your brain is lit up, you're not thinking logically anymore. You're in a state of fear, like we just said before. Machiavelli said it's better to be feared than to be loved. uh, and this is the best motivator of people and everything, but it also puts you into a state of panic where you can't think logically and make good decisions anymore. And I think there's
Maybe
elements
some
of that.
people are like that. I mean, if you're informed, see, the thing is, the answer to all of this comes from systems dynamics, something that I probably bring up at least once every podcast. There's a lot of information out there, and a lot of computer models that, like, smart rich people have access to, that can model, you know, a lot of stuff. Companies know how things are progressing, right? But I think the real solutions come uh, from this idea of systems dynamics, this idea of being able to map out how a system is flowing together, being able to identify positive feedback loops, which are kind of self reinforcing, negative feedback loops, which are sort of self limiting, be able to recognize the time delay connections, and to be able to account for all of the energy within the system. Essentially trying to
Yeah.
physicsify, everyday life is essentially the goal of systems dynamics. So when we talk about solutions, solutions are always going to be rooted in, hey, at the end of the day, we're going to have much better outcomes if we do this set of things over here, which are way more efficient in order to, like, save a lot more lives and have a lot more people be able to productively take care of themselves and contribute to the surplus that's shared. That type of thinking, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be leftist. I mean, systems dynamics certainly wasn't created to be leftist, but I think that that way of thinking is the right way of thinking, because anything
Yeah,
else,
I
you're
mean,
missing something.
Sure, and that is the right way to see. And data and AI will help us do that without as soon as we relinquish these controls over them. The problem, though, lies in the flaws of human beings imprinted on the systems that they create. And as long as they create the systems, there will be some issue where uh, they don't do what they're supposed to do. How much information is available to people right now that they don't apply to their life? Like, for instance, that smoking can kill you, or that drinking is bad for you, or that any number of health issues where
Right, and this
people
comes
experience.
back to that's why the solution is going to be an environmental system-wide solution because uh, it is demonstrably true that individual willpower is not going to be sufficient for not getting overweight or not smoking in an environment where you're constantly stressed, they're constantly marketing to you, and they've got all the
Yeah,
data on what makes you come back the most, and then they lobby to make cities that work in a
yeah,
way that specifically tricks your brain. That's what I'm saying. Like there's so much of this there's so much powerful information and ways of assessing this that are actively used against us, but the more that
right.
we collectively empower ourselves to understand the principles behind things, especially like dialectical materialism, what's in the material interest, and also how do the ideas that come from that reinforce and push back on it, because that's the only reason why this is in any way helpful, is because there is a feedback loop between ideas and the material world. It starts
Yeah,
from the material world, there's ideas, and then you try to predict things, and then there's other things that happens, right? So we do shape the world a little bit, but within the confines of what's actually possible. And getting yourself hip to, yeah, like you said, statistics and data, and trying to put it together. And I think honestly, just getting faster at identifying what's a positive feedback loop, where's a negative feedback loop happening, that alone I think is life
that'll
changing,
help.
because
Yeah,
as
and
soon
that
as something comes up and it's like, oh well, why don't we slap this band-aid solution on it, and you're just like, okay, but that's going to create a negative feedback loop where you have to put more and more energy in the system to get worse and worse results or
yeah,
whatever over
and in
time.
that case, like, and then you're right that that's the reason to be optimistic because AI is here. AI is totally amazing, by the way. It's what it's doing. It's going to be able to
There's
recognize.
never any reason to be optimistic, dude.
Yeah, right. That's what I usually say. But there is actually a race right now between us destroying the planet and us saving the planet. So when we started genetically modifying foods, we did it all wrong and we created some very questionable stuff. But I'm still not a fan of this stuff. But at the same time, we know enough about it to get it right and not screw anything up. And I think that's where we need to get to with all the building blocks of life. If we because we can't stop now. We've already made a huge mess, and we need to get down to the molecular level to find out how everything works in order to save us from the kind of molecular pollution that we've created as microplastics or whatever else, chemicals or whatever. But what you're saying is capitalism absolutely needs to be destroyed for this to even be a hope. For there to be any optimism, you
Yeah,
need to get rid of this.
that's why changing the material conditions and trying to get a lot more people hip to the ideas of systems dynamics, historical materialism, dialectical materialism, and the like
Nature.
is because without changing the power structures. Imagine for a minute, I don't want to dwell on this point, it'll make me too depressed,
Go ahead.
but imagine the world right now if at the peak of neoliberalism in the West, instead, there was radical reorganization to socialism. And it was under that context that the internet were created, that the internet were used in order to adequately connect those people for reorganization, and that always stayed free, available, robust, and human centric because of the guiding political principles. And it's like, the internet was created basically by lefties, by anarchists,
Sure.
but
Few
like,
libertarians, but yeah.
but under the system where things that are profitable get, you know,
Yeah.
taken by private interests, and then they, privatize, privatize profits, socialize losses. That's the That's the
Even
motto.
libertarians are against monopolies too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
One thing I wanted to say about the optimism point, because I was being a little bit glib, and I think that, and I love thought experiments. I'm a thought experiment guy, but
You're a Soda Stream guy.
yeah, totally. Especially as I'm talking. Oh yeah, what's up? So much cheaper. Especially I don't flavor it at all, so it's like, yeah.
It's the only way to fly.
And I have like a big. I do the big CO2 canisters and refill at home.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, reducing waste.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the thing is about optimism is we know that doomerism leads to inexorably capitalists winning.
Okay,
And
explain that to me. Because I'm a doomer and a gloomer, but I don't think that I would call myself inert, you know?
right. So doomerism leads usually to a few different things that are all equally bad for any improvement of material conditions. It leads to passivism, non-engagement,
Apathy.
and apathy about life in general. And the thing is, those things don't do anything to stop, the further concentration of
The
capital and
question is,
shit.
how do you get people to notice a problem that's so epic and existentially just dreadful and still approach it with like a warrior's kind of mentality, like get to do it with gusto and say, I'm just going to fix this problem. Now, younger people have it up to a point, but after you get bombarded with a lot
Isn't
of
that my
negative.
whole energy? I'm bringing a little bit of dude bro energy to it. Not, but like my type of it.
Me too. I'm trying to do the best I can. I smile and laugh a lot while I'm talking about the end of the world. Like, you need to put a little sugar
But
with the
yeah,
medicine.
so to finish and to finish the thought about the thought experiment about you never know when you're born, having a healthy mind cannot be dependent on all these things in the world being fixed. And so you have to partition your existence. So this is at least what I do. So I think it's really important that I work on. I'm referencing my cello down here. I think it's really important that I work on music because shit, that was already the thing. I was already having tons of problems emotionally, and that's the thing that helps. And it continues to be health and diet. Absolutely, like not gonna be, good warrior with that stuff. And I don't, I try to drink as little as possible because it does slow you down in that front. And sleep and forming communities, you have to take care of yourself. But the human nature is already to have some of itself be part of a community, to be giving, to have a little bit of extra discretionary time. And so this stuff has to fit in there and then not overconsume your life because you're going to
Yeah.
live. Most of these things are still going to be around and you're going to die.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of it. And I wanted to relate another big idea to something that you had said, because I was thinking about something that I heard once in a physics video, and I love physics.
Love them physics videos.
Because I want to be a billionaire, and I don't know if you saw Angel Collier's video about billionaires really want you to know they could have done physics, but I don't mean it. But I actually really just enjoy. It's like the most literal way of like the world working, right? So anyway, I was watching this video, and they were talking about the lack of there being a grand unified theory, like a single equation that explains both the tiny quantum world and the macro world of space-time and gravity. And a lot, how in the public's eye, at least for the last few decades, that has been like the main thing physics is about. Even though that's maybe not important. So this is what blew my mind after decades of like pop physics propaganda, that's like what's really important. Like the dude was basically saying there may straight up just not be one. It may just operate two different ways at two different scales, and that's it. Right? Like we don't know. We just have a human bias towards finding the simplicity. And so I I don't want to dwell on that part too much, but I want to take that abstract concept of, we might assume that there is this one thing that's out there in the abstract. Plato would have called it the form of it. Um, and and that doesn't mean that it has to be true. That's a metaphysical claim until, and basically on an untestable hypothesis, unless you just happen to then find one. So if we apply that same attitude towards our political expectations, I think that a lot of the time people do think that it has to come from, this is what we're going to do exactly right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time humanity's organized that way. That's why we've had, most of the time that humans have had surplus post-agriculture culture, it's been monarchs and dictators, because it is effective and efficient and just kind of easy to do for humans. Um, and so,
We just
yeah, I
need
don't.
one guy. We need one guy just to tell everybody what to do, and
Yeah,
everything will
so
just be
I
better.
want to posit that, much like with the physics concepts, that you can't just assume to be true because it feels right to you. I don't think that we can assume that there is an ideal political position, an ideal political mindset. What I think
Yeah.
we have to do is arm as many people as possible, both literally, especially figuratively, arm them with better ideas and better mindsets, so that we can start building
Yeah.
communities and empowering connection that have been taken away from us, so that large groups of people can fight in resistance. So that's the only solution, and that is, like, that's where the hope lies, is in forming these larger connectivities. And I
Yeah.
think, especially, what I would like to do is try to get people outside of the nationalist mindset, because capitalists already don't care about nations. They just use them as borders where some people have more rights than others.
Yeah.
These big corporations are already multinational. They'll put their money where the taxes are best, like at the
Yeah.
raw labor where they can use slaves. They'll sell it where there's already a puffed up economy of buyers. So we don't need to think that way either. That, I mean, we all
Globalism is
should be
here.
able to be, we all around the world should be able to have basic rights and equal access to things. I found out that in the poorest, like, um, uh, poorest third of countries, as many as half of all girls are born with no identity. They're born, they're not registered, and then they're basically sold immediately. And it's hard for them to even seek justice because they don't have an identity within the political system. And so it adds to their exploitation. That sort of shit, you know, cannot, just continue. We have to find a way of unifying as much as possible.
Yeah, and you have to go back to the American empire needs to be destroyed in order for there to be peace in the world. China's betting on a cooperative future. They might be doing just that, but either way, we're so interconnected now, and we're up against so much as a species that we don't have time for these kind of petty conflicts. That we
Yeah,
need
honestly, I
to.
think what Americans don't realize is that we're headed, as of right now, for within a few decades, being more or less what Afghanistan was, with having just roams of gangs with AK-47s and young people arming themselves just to stay safe and shit. That sucks. But that's, like, basically where we're headed. And
You know,
I do
you
think
know,
that Americans who cannot wrap their heads around socialism are simply going to eventually be defeated by the whatever growing, communist bloc from between Asia and,
yeah.
I mean, that is a very likely outcome, that the world stage will be reset in China's vision, or in the collection of
Well,
of several of those countries.
in the true spirit of dialectics, what will happen will eventually, because things move slow, and like you said, they don't happen overnight, that the model that China has that we all know is winning will be adopted by other countries at some point. And they'll offer people very basic necessities. They're going to try to protect the
The
environment.
reason
They're
why
going to,
socialist countries can be so poor and prosperous is by following the tenets of socialism, which allow for far more efficient use of human labor and trade routes and resources. So the thing
yeah,
that's happening right now I think, is that there's basically low hanging fruit. All you got to do is become more socialist and your country is going to become more prosperous. And so some countries are just doing that. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like they're getting in on the game. That's what I'm saying. America, by being so resistant to it, may just miss out
Does not
on
help another.
being able to be part of the writers of it.
Right. And Yugoslavia did just fine for years and years and years. And it wasn't until they took money from the IMF that it all took a
Yeah.
downward spiral. And then we pushed these ethnic groups to kill each other and stuff. But on its own. And the other thing is the economic calculation problem, which was the big argument from Hayek and Ludwig von Mises. I don't know if I say this idiot's name. But these economists from 100 years ago say communism can never work because they never know how much stuff to make. And at the beginning of China's rise, they had problems deciding how much buildings to build. And they build big cities and then they destroyed them. Of course, we all saw that. But at the same time, now they use data and we have data. We have access to AI. We have access to internet. So we have sensors, cameras, all that stuff. And you take in these vast amounts of data, you can find out without having the market guide it all the way that you can make assumptions and say, well,
make
did these
Amazon
people
public, and it already has the algorithm that Stalin or Mao would have wanted in order to best match products to people who need them the most.
Right, exactly. But and as long as you stopped them from advertising malicious products that were bad for the environment or bad for them or addictive,
True.
poisonous, toxic,
But
that's
if it's publicly owned, then we would get a say on that, democratically.
that's the thing. And if we had enough people, I don't know how it works in China, but they have like a whole fucking rows and row, like a whole stadium full of bureaucrats that just sit around and decide what's appropriate for the majority of people and whatnot. And I think sometimes you do make mistakes. There's that's enlightened despotism. Again, if you have a lot of engineers and scientists who look over the people and try to decide what's best for them, even them being so smart, and there's still going to be mistakes. Even if AI is so smart and tries to decide, there'll still be mistakes, but it'll be possibly a far sight better than what we've had in the past, which already the nutrition information that you can get immediately from ChatGPT, I go, hey, I got a funky looking toenail. I give and the thing can tell me in a second whether or not I need medical assistance or not. This is going to revolutionize stuff. And the muddy waters of nutrition science has already been bad. Nobody knows what the fuck to eat. We're all confused. That is going to crack it open because you can say, what's the scientific consensus on that? And give me the actual scientific studies.
And just do the logic. Do the sensible thing or whatever.
People have to want to learn, though. And the problem is, too, that we're battling up against the Flynn effect is now null and void because people aren't getting any smarter like they used to every 10
Except
years.
for you and me, brother, and everybody listening to this.
Yeah, we're all alone. How many people? 8 people. Everybody else is like, I'm going back to TikTok to watch people put Mentos in Coke.
Oh,
goodbye.
The people who are here are the real ones. They're watching like amazing political takes happen in real time that'll later be clipped and go huge. I'm saying it now.
Yeah.
And I think to some degree the unfortunateness of not getting people together isn't simply that the status quo will continue. It is just that like we won't have the say so much in it. But a couple of things that I've really been reflecting on recently, and I guess this contributes to what I brought up at the beginning about enlightened Western left mindsets or whatever. One, one thing that's really hard to talk about, and yet I think everybody needs to know, is how bad the CIA torture shit is in its brutality, in how they have doctors there to extend the patient's life so that they can be tortured for years on end. The fact that it was so routinized that it was like there was straight up paperwork about it, and for a while then there were these leaked photos because this woman journalist, she just went to Iraq and was like interviewing people, and so they have these like selfies with the military people like and the torture victims and people being held without reason at black sites all around the world. I mean, this is basically a giant terror organization. And you think about how people want to paint every death that occurred under communism as a direct result of communism killing people. And yet we don't want to credit capitalism for killing people who didn't have adequate nutrition, who didn't have adequate health care, and people who they just kill in order to maintain hegemony. And
Yeah.
so I do think that even if there were a world order taken by China as it grew, chances are our lives would at the very least, maintain some stability. But
Yeah.
more likely we'd actually improve our material conditions. And a couple other things that have contributed to my understanding of the historical materialism involved here come from Hakim, the YouTuber. And he pointed out that the last gulag was closed. And this is still, they shouldn't have been open, but whatever. I'm just saying the last one was closed in the early 60s, decades before the fall of the Soviet Union. The CIA studying that we now have these documents where the CIA themselves had noted of even Stalin's Russia that the people had a significant degree of democratic voice. And what we see from China as well is that they settled on something that was a lot more like a mixed economy once things were a little bit more orderly. Now, there's still obviously huge issues with genocides that are occurring under China. What my point is that there is actually a trend towards the peace that was promised by Marxist-Leninism, whereas in the West, the remnants of the Cold War that are the CIA black sites, that are Guantanamo, whatever, they're bigger than ever. So capitalism did not stamp them out, whereas even when they existed under the violent Marxist-Leninists, it settled down, right? Like that is historically the thing that ends up happening. So I think we do have to I do think we have to reckon with how much violence occurs right now and how much of that it should be credited to capitalism when we are fearful of violence under revolution, because there will be. This is the whole reason why leftists get annoyed with people who can't just fucking listen, because yeah, there was, or maybe still is, peaceful ways to transition to socialist orders, but that's not what we're doing. That's not what's happening. And so, yeah, it's gonna be a bloody revolution, but that was a choice made collectively, not to listen.
Yeah. The next generation will do it too. It might be bloodless though, because by the time
there's already blood though,
that's true. But
yeah,
and it's going to be the boomers generation who is going to be responsible for it, and then they're going to, after all the people right now who are over 40, let's say over 50, since I'm 40, when they go away, actually it's like the people that are like 60 now, basically the people who voted for Trump and the people who were, I don't know, were from the 20th century. The young people, they voted, they said over 60% of young people under the age of 30 think that socialism is A-okay. So that's going to happen. And they're going to figure it out. And I think that the next generation will probably copy whatever model works and introduce it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm basically just like, yeah, I need to be the guy to simplify the expression of the ideas, because I feel like I am uniquely sort of in a position to be able to do that. Raised by like a on the spectrum like law professor, but then went off to the whole, you could say, railroad hopping shit for the latter half of my life. So it's like, there is that, but yeah, there is also just the reality of the expectation that these things aren't going to change here, but eventually, and after a lot of unnecessary brutality, yeah, there's just pressure points that are already happening, already changing. I have a video I want to make that's like, when is enough enough? Does fire need to rage through cities? Do we need to have millions of people on the street? Do we need to have whole cities being bombed? Oh wait, we're all just used to that now.
Yeah.
So
it's that you got to get clever. You got to get beyond clever. But the other problem is that I always stress to people who are optimistic is the amount of control that I got into argument with Cory Doctorow about this, the amount of control that technology has on our lives and how pervasive it is, where they can stop activist movements before they even start by getting on social media and cooperating with these big, with Facebook or whoever, and intercepting signal chats or whatever, that we're in a spot where it seems harder than ever. Now he disagreed with me, but the thing is, we have some technology, but they have the most important technology, which is big computers, lots of data, and all the money, and that
Yeah.
makes things a little scary.
Same game,
But
different toys. But
but
yeah, it has made the
w-
gap wider, probably.
if you're for fiery revolution, I'm for fiery
I'm
revolution.
not for it.
What? Did we just become best friends? Yup.
I'm not for, to be clear, I'm not for it. I'm just explaining why it's going to happen, right? In fact, one of the ways that I have tried to express myself on this Justin's Thoughts channel is kind of distancing myself from having labels and just trying to share the concepts. Like
That's
I
good.
don't need
Take
you
a
to,
neutral. Yeah, that's what I want. I
you
want to
know,
try to do too, but it's hard not to have a critique, an emotional critique on things.
right.
But
Let the
yeah,
passion come through. But like, I'm just saying, like, I mean, you can have a problem with me saying that America's headed towards something resembling Afghanistan over the last couple decades, but you're gonna have to, like, if you have a problem with that idea, then we can talk about that. But if you think that somehow you have a problem with me because I'm saying that, that's misdirected, I think.
yeah, and I don't even care anymore because people are inherently flawed, and for every black dude who wants his liberation, he's over there being misogynistic towards women, and if for every gay guy that's out there that's like wants his gay rights or whatever, he's like
Do you
not
know
a
the YouTube
vegan.
channel Non-Compete?
I've heard of it. What is it?
Pull them up real quick because and if you go to banyanhouse.org, BANYAN house, I think, they allow you to download the PDF of their socialism textbook translated from the Vietnamese curriculum for free.
All right,
Or you
there
can
you
pay,
go.
but yeah, they're not withholding the information behind a paywall. So everybody should start enlightening themselves through that book. It does have quite a lot of forewords, so maybe just, skim them and then get to the good stuff. But
Okay,
yeah.
very cool.
Did you want to get back to some of the lessons from Settlers? Was that something that was interesting for this?
Yeah, I wanted to hear your critique on that book because I've heard of it.
All right. So basically, the premise of Settlers is that there's a sparkly young chap. No, I'm just kidding. Settlers is a nonfiction. Is basically a scathing critique of U.S. internal imperialism from 1500 to present, which at the time of the writing was either the late 70s or early 80s. And it is amazing how all of the trends that are already happening then and that he predicts are the exact things that have happened, which it gives a lot of weight, I think, to the book. And even though in the beginning he explains, because the subtitle of the book is The Mythology of the White Proletariat. So he is claiming, at least the point of the book is to explain to non-whites what the driving mythology for all of us has been. But in doing so, I ended up having a lot more understanding of what the fuck culture I grew up in was in the first place. Because I was born, like, my parents were from the East Coast, and then they moved to where I was, and then I wasn't even the same religion and all this weird stuff. So I think that was part of my own personal journey of trying to figure out how the world order sort of works. And this book basically helps completely solve it in talking about all of the various figures that come in and out over time. So he talks about how the first people who were coming over from Europe to the Americas were basically middle class. They were people who had enough money to do the voyage. And he describes a situation in the old world of Europe, which very much resembles modern day pretty much everywhere, where there's not any more land. So you can't expect to own a house. There's like too many people for the area. And so for the middle class, you would take you would take a gamble. It's kind of like, now you go to the coast if you're born in the middle of the country, go to the coast, the eastern coast, cross the Atlantic, and they're making way for us there. How are they making way? Well, obviously, a core of it is a brutal slave trade, but almost in a way that gets overemphasized compared to how much they squash down the impact of other cultural groups, from Latino Americans and Mesoamericans of very, very various places, and also Chinese and Japanese immigrants, who, like, all of these people collectively and native populations were labored to create things like railway networks and infrastructure that then they were legislatively kicked out of being able to use. So, the book does go into a lot of sort of horrible stuff like that. But the analysis, I think, is also that's what I'm trying to share now. So in a big picture way, the period, between about 1600 and the American Revolution was kind of this period where there was a large, among European settlers, merchant class, people who could expect to apprentice for some job or another that they would eventually be able to own their own business with, and maybe eventually have the younger hand of their own, but mostly be working it themselves, kind of like a socialist dream. It's weird that in this story of almost apocalyptic scenarios, we see how perfectly utopian the attempt was on the part of the Europeans for themselves specifically, and at the expense of others directly. He points out that the lush trees and all of this nature that the settlers from 1600 onward encountered was not the state of North America pre-contact, because contact had happened more than 100 years earlier, and Christopher Columbus's many voyages back systematically introduced widespread disease that killed so many of the population that the land had 100 years to grow back more or less undisturbed, and that's the reason why they found it that way. That's insane, right? So yeah, as things progress, as time progresses rather, there's always kind of this clock on the slave trade. I think that the way that it gets written in the West, Abraham Lincoln gets a lot of credit for like ending slavery. But the thing is that America was even kind of late to the game on ending slavery. Like, there was already people realizing, and this is a practice that at the time, right, has been around for 100+ years, but not 400+ years. And they're starting to realize, like, this is not something that is maybe long-term sustainable. The Haitian Revolution in the mid 18th century scared the shit out of the leaders, colonial leaders of America, because they then did to, the white colonists down there the same level of oppression. So there was extensive writings between the framers of the Constitution over the years about how to deal with the slave problem. And the thing is, and this kind of goes back to our earlier conversation about having to actually make systemic reform, these same people writing about that died with more slaves than at the time that they were writing it. It did not end until the system ended, because it continued to be profitable for people who could just take free labor. You know what I'm saying? And that led to, so basically he kind of rewrites a bit that slavery was this practice that was definitely in full force and needed to be eradicated heroically, when in actuality it was a practice so terrible it was always destined for a reduction in severity that happened 50 years later than it did in England, after a lot of foot trailing and after a civil war that the North couldn't have won without European support. Europe, which had already banned slavery, and so that was actually a lot of the selective pressure on Lincoln to choose to be anti-slavery, in the first place, because his main goal, as he stated, was to preserve the Union. So without the support of Europe, so he made it explicitly an enterprise. No, we're the ones trying to end slavery, like you guys did, in order that they were able to be supported by European allies. So that's crazy, right? And then he goes into much depth from like the 1830s to the 1930s, talking about the various socialist movements. So it used to be a lot more common for America to have socialist movements, especially after the 1860s. And especially, I guess, because especially by that point, Marx has had a time to sort of influence people's ideas, and people already know about like the USSR and stuff. Or no, sorry, what am I saying? They just know about the literature, and so there's openly socialist movements throughout this time. And he goes into a lot of detail. I think he really lays it on thick with the detail, even so that you really understand what could have been summarized, but by seeing it again and again and again and again and again, drives home how only one of those movements ever was a truly multiracial workers unification. Every other one was either just caring about white workers, or in the course of their time abandoned the black workers as soon as the whites had gained their relative advantages. And one of the things that I think really has shaped my understanding of the macro history of the last 100 years is an understanding that after decades and decades and decades of resisting pressure on the part of the US government, resisting pressure for these socialist changes, it was in a time of dire need for the support of people that the New Deal concessions were made in the 30s. Concessions that mostly just benefited white workers and were things that are relatively paltry when you consider the overall system that was still going on. Things like the 8-hour workday or the 5-day work week, etc. So what happened is the ruling class always had intended to try to backtrack on that. And one of the true catalyzing forces is, and I'm not blaming the civil rights movement for this, it's still blame on the colonialists, but as soon as the Civil Rights Act would have ostensibly created this whole new group of people benefiting from the New Deal who previously had just been exploited, that was going to seriously undermine the total balance of economics. I love that clip of Martin Luther King saying, it didn't cost 1 penny to, integrate lunch, but it's not going to change further until we have billions of dollars recirculated. And so you can see then the legal effort ever since to create the mass incarceration programs, to create to have redlining, and then to have for decades to come these parallel societies, the suburban and the urban societies, and all of this stuff kind of blowing back. So that being the overarching kind of stretch of what has happened since like 1880 till now, the core point of the book Settlers is how nothing short of a full actual worldwide socialist proletariat revolution is going to stem the tide, because I'm sure people at a time could have justified, okay, it's just better for us, but there's going to be more progress made. But he says, no, that was just a move that pacified people, that reduced the overall resistance. And in the end, all of it was stripped back anyway, because there was no change to the power structure. The way that this book helped me understand my place in the whole picture is when it was talking about the various immigrant groups that came in. And so basically what happened is, after the Civil War ended, the reason why there's this huge immigration period at the end of the 19th century is because after the Civil War ended, and even though some blacks were staying on plantations to just do what they were used to, others were moving north or into cities. And there was, again, this fear, Haitian Revolution, we don't want the balance to shift. This was sort of the original like great replacement theory sort of bullshit in this country. And so that's where the explicit campaign to say, hey, give me your tired, give me your huddled masses, as long as they're white Europeans. And, you know, and so it is under that circumstance that my ancestors came into the picture at all, being Eastern European Jews who came over. Some came over at the end of the 19th century. Some came over a little bit before World War II. And, you know, then were slowly welcomed into the fold. Did the generational thing of, you know, the first immigrants are opening their own businesses and just, you know, working super, super hard. After a couple generations, there's a more educated class arising in the family lineage. And I was like, okay, now I understand. Now I understand why I've been told all my life I'm privileged, while I know I'm not the top tier privileged. This completely explains my place in that, right? Somebody who wasn't initially part of the English German whiteness, somebody who was only brought in at, you know, like this one, you know, even just like my dad going to a couple Ivy League schools. I mean, he couldn't have done that a few decades prior, because the actual purpose of the interviews that you do for those schools is to check in person if you're a Jew, which might not be as obvious as other races that they wanted to discriminate against. So, you know, basically you can see in Settlers, he's writing then that, you know, all this stuff stripped back, all these you know, white workers' revolutions were insufficient, and you know, time and time again, white people turn their heads away from class consciousness in order to fulfill, and this is where the title comes from, the settler fantasy. And so this book also really helped me recognize in myself that my pre-existing thought that the ultimate achievement in life is, for me, is like being able to eventually own land where I can grow my own food and subsist or whatever. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe I don't need that, because that mythology just came from this. And there's a lot of ways of interacting with the earth. And I don't need to need any of it. So yeah, that's kind of Settlers overview in a nutshell. You wanna?
Yeah, I mean, the slavery has been around for so long too. The transatlantic slave trade, actually pretty short in comparison to the duration of other slavery in South Asia, like in India and stuff. It goes back as,
well, it's just so brutal. That's what I'm saying. Like, it could only last so. They're bringing people over in boats. There's some of the highlight reel of how horrible it is. They're bringing people over in boats where they have 18 inches of covered space to just be lying there in their own shit and piss, probably chained up next to other people. And as many as half of them died in the voyage because of that. Yeah. You know, people can't even survive. And then there's people sitting next to their dead fucking relatives and kindred. People are forbidden to speak their original languages, whipped if they do. Eventually, the original languages are forgotten. The original cultures are forgotten. And, you know, that's the thing. Like, I at least know that I'm from like Eastern European Jewish, whatever. I simply would not know what tribes or specific areas I was from if I was from this group. You know, that Beau of the Fifth Column, now Bella the Ranch, has an excellent video talking about that. So yeah, so I mean, it was absolutely just the worst kind of slavery possible. And there's a lot of slavery in the modern day, and a lot of it involves abuse. But yeah, like you're saying, other slavery of the past was not even such a relationship necessarily.
No, yeah, it can't, unsustainable sort of, because once you build wealth off of slavery, and then there becomes this other class of people. A lot of the people don't want to see that sort of brutality. And that's why they had stuff like the dumbwaiter, where we don't even want to look at the fact that we have help in our house. We have the food sent up through a food elevator,
Yeah.
At some point they become a little uncomfortable with their own creation, and that they decide that they would stop it. But in countries that they're still poor, you'll find that there's slavery, but we haven't been poor for a long time. All the mechanical machines that make us our TV dinners and stuff has made it so we don't necessarily have to slave
Well, and going
people
back
like
to
we
our
used to.
conversation earlier, the technology that has been created is not optimized. It's built for profit, not for us actually getting maximum utility. It's like the impression of that, but there's also all these other marketable aspects of it. Like I'm shocked actually to find out that tech for Americans is lagging other countries, because it's not been that relatively hard for the intelligent people of other countries to figure out how to use computers and build upon them. That's like why there was that whole, like, they built the AI that, in a fraction of the time and budget and all that crap. So there's a lot of like apps that make a lot more sense, and phones that make more sense.
Yeah, this is also why you see so many kind of advances in these countries. Is they have the technology now because the internet has democratized a lot of stuff, so they're able to get back on their feet fast and then tear down the American hegemony, which has been shrouded them in sort of darkness for so long, that I think simply having the internet has turned a lot of people on all around the world of what, for how America has treated them and how to build a fucking water filtration system out of a Coke bottle and a solar panel. Yeah.
The Soviet Union went from complete agriculture society to being the first nation to put a man in space.
Yeah.
Within decades, because there's a lot that's possible with humans. I think a lot of times people really, and this kind of goes into something that's called mean world hypothesis or mean world theory, that it's this thing that conservatives often feel is intrinsically true, that the world's a mean place, and there's always going to be ugliness no matter what you do, and that it just flat out ignores systems dynamics. Because I love this. There's a saying too that, like, saying that human beings are intrinsically selfish and competitive while only ever seeing humans in capitalism is like only ever seeing humans in water and concluding that it's in human nature to drown.
Yeah.
I love that metaphor. So it's there are things that are possible.
I got one for you. Ancient Chinese parable. When the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. Yeah,
that comes back to the, like, waking up to what's our actual impact on the world. And that's, of course, the whole core of the vegan movement as well, is adequately reflecting on the interspecies relationship.
Well, you were talking about slaves on slave ships being sitting in their own feces. Take a look at some videos of some live export ships where they cram animals in there cheek to cheek, and they have one veterinarian who's on board to cover like a giant fucking cruise ship full of fucking wild domestic livestock. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. And this is why we're not allowed to film in these kind of places.
This is why I can't believe in God, because if God exists and he were to create this amount of disproportionate suffering and unnecessary suffering and prolonged suffering, then he would just straight up be an evil God, and we wouldn't want to worship him anyway.
Who said hell doesn't exist because all the devils are here?
No, that's some boomer shit. I feel.
Somebody said that, though. I'm trying to figure out whose quote that is. It's a famous quote. Hell doesn't exist. All the devils are here.
All the devils are here.
I'll find out.
It's been pretty awesome to chat, although there haven't been any triggered conservatives in my chat, at least so far.
We got to work harder then.
I thought I already had a punchable enough face,
Well,
when I smile and talk about all my lib shit.
Sartre said, "Hell is other people."
Well, that's
Uh,
what the quote made me think of, but it is worded slightly differently. So that must be
it's in The Tempest. So in the William Shakespeare's The Tempest, it says, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here." So it's just reflecting chaos and betrayal. Okay, that's what I was thinking of. I didn't know I knew Shakespeare. Cool. The
everybody
Tempest.
knows Shakespeare. Eyeball comes from Shakespeare.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, that's interesting. I should brush up on my. I know The Tempest is the weird one.
Yeah. I dated someone in high school who did a lot of Shakespeare, and I was like, all right, I'll pretend that I understand this.
It's like learning a different language.
Like once they tell me, once they translate the story into normal English, then it's like, oh, I see what's happening. But it's like, yeah.
Did you ever see now?
Did you ever see the Leonardo DiCaprio retelling of Romeo and Juliet, where they
Oh, of
did
course.
update the language to like 90s slang, which is just as dated
by now? Yeah. Yeah, because I grew up in that era, and that was a big deal. Because Kate Winslet, no, who was it? Who played the opposite? Claire Danes.
I don't even remember.
They were cute. It was a good movie. Whatever. It was interesting.
There's a great video. I think the channel is called like something like crap. I don't know. I don't know. But he had a video about the liberal to fascist pipeline, how Harvard. If you type in like liberal fascist Harvard, you'll probably find his video. And especially because in my younger college days of going to a lot of like music festivals and stuff and rubbing shoulders with essentially the music equivalent of these like extremely privileged like Ivy League schools, right? And a lot of them having money that I did not realize the amount of more money that they had. Like I remember like talking in earnest with so many people about like what I can do, what prospects there are, and there was always some gulf missing, and the gulf is, oh, I didn't feel like I could ask my parents for money to just go to school in Europe or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is all aside.
Which would have saved you money actually too in the end.
Maybe arguably, but again, you have to have that up front in the first place, right?
Right. So, material conditions.
Yeah. And this is why so many things should be socialized and publicly owned and maintained, because there is such a concept as economies of scale. There is such a concept as buying in bulk, means that you're spending less down the line. There is no reason why that economic truth should be shifted to the individual in every specific instance when we know that doesn't work out, right?
And that they really rail on and on about the idea of a meritocracy, when in reality, if you give people resources, their merit becomes higher. And say, well, he has no merit.
But that does go back to what I'm saying. And I was also, because I was a proto-leftist during this time, I was certainly very fuck the system, but still very much like liberally, like I would love to be successful here. But I was also like by that point, I was already like partying a lot, relative there, always taking the music seriously, don't worry, but basically fuck everything else. And, I think there is a reason why I did not find answers in the world of like elite contemporary classical music in Europe, because they don't have any answers for the societal stuff. They don't even engage really with it. It's a completely foreign world to them. And because the world that they live in is so intricate by design, this world, this bourgeois
they live in
world,
they live in a museum, dude.
Yeah, and they like it. And I'm like, okay, fine, I guess.
You got everybody, whether it's the Bible.
I didn't have the same reverence for that shit,
Yeah, everybody needs their escape.
So yeah, it was very cathartic to watch this YouTuber's video about like the Harvard to fascist pipeline, where it's like, yeah, liberals do say a lot of things that are like technically correct. You might even go as far as to say that liberals understand a lot of the world's problems, although I think that's also a bit of a stretch. But to the extent that they do over conservatives simply because they are better informed and fed more information and less propaganda, or at least a different set of propaganda, right? Because there's the meritocracy propaganda, and
Yeah.
that's the thing, and that's the thing that he says, is that these people who are, and it's not like there's people who aren't great minds who like didn't go to these schools. However, the selectivity of the schools kind of makes it so that everyone going there is like kind of the cream of the crop for their age. And yet, what are they doing with their time and their understanding of society? They're trying to figure out how to advance their career forward first and foremost.
Well, because at the end of the day, it does boil down to the hierarchy of needs, and people are mostly concerned about themselves. We're the ones who got to live with us. We're the ones who've got to live. We're the ones who got to die. We want to be comfortable. And even the people who are very esoteric academics and artists and stuff, they all leftists pretend like money's not important or whatever. Being comfortable is the underlying thing beyond
What I'll tell you is, that I advocate for a very simple living, relatively to what, and I have striven for that myself. I think that if you crunch the numbers, now GDP does not represent all, because it doesn't take into account environmental costs, it doesn't take into account unpaid labor that is nonetheless productive. However, if you take the world GDP, it's like $100 trillion. And if you divide that by and we're going to make the math simple, roughly 10 billion people on Earth, then that is $10,000 apportioned per person. And when you consider that Europe, at least the way that Europe offers its services, they take half in tax. We can kind of assume half is probably best going to go towards those things that I was saying are cheaper when done in bulk, do benefit from economies of scale. Personally, we're not going to have to worry about transportation, housing, food, a lot of this stuff, because that's going to be taken care of by a system. But now you have to think about the remaining $5,000. It is more or less discretionary funding. And it will still vary by people. Like, some people are just more active and productive than other people. That's why there is some variance in this. And that to some degree is a choice. Like maybe if you want to live more comfortably, mentally and peacefully, you don't need as much money. And then it's a self-reinforcing thing to some degree. But you think about the $5,000, are you spending more than that? But just like picture what that sort of is, per year, I suppose, because the money will circulate. Like you get a MacBook, that's already going to eat up a big chunk of that, but it is possible. So I think running this experiment shows that in a very well distributed economic situation, given current world productivity, that one, it is possible to take care of everybody and beyond the basic needs. And two, that what we would probably normally consider like lower middle class levels of income, at least historically in the US, maybe not now, but like what historically is probably about what you need to picture, But I think that there's an immense, like once you've run that mental experiment, if you're able to kind of like make your life a little bit like fitting in line with that amount of cost, you're preparing yourself for what that sort of world equality might look like. You're showing it to other people that it's not that bad. And one thing that is interesting about the whole leftist saying money doesn't matter, I think that's probably a lot of liberals who are more materially comfort saying it. But one thing I will say is that I'm in my 30s now, having taken care of issues related to confidence or health or developing a skill or developing a business, I am at the place where the most obvious thing that's going to improve or destroy my life is the world around me. So I think there's two battles that need to be fought. And I think it's totally okay, especially when you're young, to focus on building yourself that way, but focus on building things that you actually continue to own. Don't just go work for the company where even though it's obfuscated, your work's contributing to these, terrible systems. No, do things with your hands, build things that are actually valuable to you. This is actually one of the ways that I believe that we can individually have resistance to the labor theft in the first place, is if we are able to negotiate for more time in our lives that we use productively on health, learning, whatever, that we become wealthier, because you don't need as much money if you're getting the things already that meet those needs, right? That's just efficiency. There's people spending lots of money who are completely unhappy, and instead of just going, oh, such a tragedy, like, no, that's disgusting. Like, it's not even helping. Just get rid of that.
Yeah. It's only a matter of time, but they figure it out, hopefully.
A lot of good concepts brought up in this, I think, but I can see you're getting kind of tired, so we can wrap up.
Oh yeah. Well, what time is it here? It's only 2 a.m.
Oh, it's at the top of the hour. That kind of feels good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, you come back and do this again more often, because I need to revive this podcast. We're going to start doing more stuff again and warm it up so that we have keep it juicy. And yeah, we had interesting people on and stuff like that. What's your schedule like? Are you interested in doing some more of these talks?
Hell yeah. I'm now actually in a technologically set up enough place.
You're saying you don't live in your van anymore?
Well, I do live in my van, but it's on a permanent spot in someone's backyard. And I also bought
cool.
a trailer that's this studio that I'm in, and I have Spectrum internet broadband so that I specifically could be better accessible for remote stuff. Yeah. Barely subsisting. We got the gigs, but we live simply and just working to grow the content and my understanding of things. That's kind of where I'm at. Yeah.
And you're enjoying your life as much as you can,
And that's the individual responsibility part. That's the true individual responsibility, not basic needs, but your own happiness. You are still responsible for that, making the best of your life and all that,
Yeah. Well, that takes me to our commercial break. We better take a commercial break.
I don't know how you do it. I put together some really impressive deals. But this thing you've pulled off, it's amazing. A big and tasty for just $1? How do you do it? What's your secret?
Got a buck? You're in luck. Because you can get a delicious beefy big and tasty, a McChicken sandwich, and lots of your other favorites on McDonald's Dollar Menu every day.
I want to have like a lot of 90s retro nostalgia commercials like that in my thing.
Oh man.
I got some good ones. Here. Got these video clips. But yeah, can you help me? We'll plan ahead. I'll give you editor's credit on the book. You help me edit it. We'll write it together. I'll give you, we could say written by Chris Jeffries and Justin Lepard.
Well, you can have an acknowledgments page in the beginning and or the back.
My buddy. Yeah, that'd be cool. I think we should do it. I think it's a good document.
It's classy to have an acknowledgments page where you're like, my wife for supporting me through all this stuff, Justin Lepard for helping me edit and revise.
Dr. Lepard.
Whatever.
Dr. Lepard.
Please, Dr. Lepard was my grandfather. And believe me, the man had to stick up his butt. But
yeah,
he probably wanted it to be a dick because he was gay in an era that was really tough for that. I think that really defined a lot of the arc of his life.
That's a deal breaker. That'll make you pretty miserable if you can't do with the thing you like to do.
But I still have his cello bow because he played back when the army had an orchestra.
Crazy, really?
It's actually a pretty good German bow. Freshener is doing pretty well right now or whatever.
Third generation fiddler. Bowmeister. What
Right.
was it the same? Was it the same instrument?
Yeah, cello. My dad played violin, so I guess it is third generation in that way.
That's crazy. Yeah. See, I wish I had something like that. Nobody is anything. Third generation TV watching, country bumpkin, you know.
I mean, it did cross my mind once I started to have a moderate but not the outstanding career success in music that I'd wanted, that I came from moderate, genuine privilege, like to have access in early life to musical instruments and stuff and support along the way doing it.
Yeah.
But it's still moderate because like actually spending money was like pulling teeth and like
Oh,
apart.
yeah.
Yeah. So anything apart from the lessons, like the actual cello or those festivals in college that I was mentioning that my teacher was like really hard. Like if you're going to this state school with me, you really got to go like be able to play with these other people. So that was like the importance of that. And yeah, it's not like they didn't support me. It's just like there was a moderate amount and I have a moderate amount of success, and that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 That's how things turn out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you're lucky because you got to make music or hear music in the house or have music in your family. I guess I had music in my family a little bit, but it was mostly.
And even in that way, there's people who are children of professional musicians already, outstanding. The
Well,
music
I will
that I was
say,
around was a little bit more,
well, I will say this: my
immediate.
grandpa did play jazz guitar, and he did play with Muddy Waters and
wow.
Johnny Cash's wife, June Carter, and a few other people. So that was cool.
That's
But other
awesome.
than that, around my house, this is all I have.
Oh my God.
That's
I love that you
my
have these all ready to go.
yeah, that was my Saturday night. So no, I'm going to make more of those. All right, so we'll end it and we'll talk right after. We'll make a plan.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks everybody
Thank
for
you.
watching.